All right, I think we'll get started. So welcome to our 60th Honors Colloquium entitled Not Business as Usual, Business for the Common Good. Just a few housekeeping details. Exits are on the back and on both sides of the stage. The bathrooms are in the foyer, and no photos or video recordings, please. Please also silence your phones so that we can give our undivided attention to the speaker. And actually, even students, I encourage you to put them away. You've been doing a great job of that over the last 3 sessions. If you need to leave during the event, please close the door quietly behind because those doors do make noise. Carl, is our land acknowledgement person here? Okay. So I'm going to read the land acknowledgement. The University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional stomping ground of the Narragansett Nation and the Niantic people. We honor and respect the enduring and continuing relationship between the indigenous people and this land by teaching and learning more about their history and present-day communities and by becoming stewards of the land we too inhabit. Do we have anybody from the Narragansett tribe or nation here tonight that's a student? Just say yes, because I can't see you. No? Okay. Well, Maya Hill was supposed to be here. If she does come, just let me know. I'd love to give her 2 minutes if it's not before the speaker goes. So in this last colloquium, it's our tradition to introduce the next colloquium. Our next colloquium is very exciting because it falls during a presidential election year, and it's entitled Democracy in Peril. And it's being organized by the College of Arts and Sciences. It's particularly exciting because 2024 is, like I said, a presidential election year. And also, it's going to be a collaboration with the Center for the Humanities. They will be partnering with us and running a speaker series also throughout the year dedicated to democracy. The colloquium organizers are Brian Kruger, Mark Hutchison, Ashley Rundlett, and Elizabeth Mendenhall, all from the Department of Political Science. And I believe Elizabeth has a joint appointment in Marine Affairs. And so I invite them up because they're going to provide a broad brushstroke sort of a description of this very exciting next colloquium. So please welcome them to the stage.
Thank you, Karen. I'm Mark Hutchison, the Chair of Political Science Department. With me is Ashley Rundlett and Brian Kruger. We're very excited. I guess excited might be a loaded term. For the very serious topic that we're going to be addressing in next year's colloquium. Obviously, as Karen mentioned, it is a big election, 2024. And I don't think I need to remind all of you the different changes that have occurred in our country and some of the polarization that's occurred in our country, particularly over the last 20 years. In 1989, a scholar named Francis Fukuyama declared the end of history. And the end of history noted that at the end of the Cold War, democracy won, right? Defeat of the Soviets, defeat of communism, defeat of totalitarianism. This was maybe a little presumptive, particularly over the last 2 decades. And so we really want to explore what is globally known as democratic backsliding, a retreat of democracy. We tend to think here in the United States that it is only happening here, but in fact, the United States, some of the forces, some of the populism, some of the trends that are occurring in the United States are also occurring globally. And so we look at countries like Hungary or Turkey or Poland, or even countries like Russia and China, and we see over time a retreat in not just democracy in some cases, but a retreat in civil liberties and democratic values. And so our colloquium, we are going to be addressing the various nuances and the various trends, not just here in the United States and the manifestations of that and the dangers of that, but also we're going to be looking at it from a global perspective as well. And so we're really excited about sharing this with you. I know that it will be very timely, and so yeah, we look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're very excited about this next colloquium. Honors students know that that you can repeat an honors colloquium class. So if you did the business colloquium and you just love the format, love the experience, you can repeat and do the democracy colloquium in the fall of next year. So over the course of this speaker series, we've celebrated the 100th anniversary of the College of Business and also the 60th anniversary of our honors colloquium. We've heard topics that have ranged from achieving a state of blue mind to making the switch to purpose-driven work and tackling inequality in the workplace. We've brought in incredible regionally, nationally, and internationally renowned speakers that have spoken to our students in our colloquium course. And that I've heard from students at the dinner repeatedly that the opportunity to speak with these renowned speakers has been incredible and has been sort of the pinnacle of their studies. And for first semester freshmen, perhaps that's not saying a lot yet because this is their first experience at URI. But for juniors and seniors, it's been really great to hear that you've enjoyed speaking with these speakers as much as you have. Some of these speakers have included Jerry Davis and Helena and Lanre Ajakayi, Wallace J. Nichols, Ana Maria Pedro, and also, of course, our guest speaker tonight, Andy Hoffman. And students, what I have really loved hearing is that these speakers, all of these speakers, have said how incredible you are, how incredible your questions have been during the colloquium course. Lanre, last week, if you remember, said that specifically to you. He took a moment, in fact, I think most of the speakers have taken a moment to say to you, honor students, that the level of conversation and discourse has been incredibly intellectually thought-provoking for them. So this colloquium series has represented and celebrated at Honors what we do best, namely delve into the major issues of our time. And it has also embodied the new direction that we're heading in Honors education, which is to prepare you, our URI students, as future change makers. So a lot of you are thinking about how to do cooperative business now, how to participate as community members in business endeavors. As a reminder, producing a series of this scope requires 1 to 2 years worth of planning and many, many campus partners. I'd like to thank especially the colloquium coordinators, Christy Ashley, Doug Creed, and Sarai Argene from the College of Business. Can we just all take a moment to thank them heartily because they put this together? I'd like to also thank our incredible staff in honors, including Anna Blake, our coordinator, honors coordinator, Melissa Stevens, our communication specialist, and Carl Aspeland, our associate director of honors. I'd like to thank James in ITS for being here every week, and also our incredible URI marketing and communications team. I'd like to thank all the sponsors on the program, and especially the College of Business for this wonderful event. And I'd also especially like to thank the president and provost and their offices, not only for their funding, but also for their regular in-person attendance and support. They show up. Please consider supporting our honors program. I can't avoid saying that. Please consider supporting our honors program. One of the exciting things that your funding will contribute to is our new honors food recovery fellows program that we're going to be piloting in our colloquium course. I can tell you more about that later if you're interested. Another example of what your funding could include is portraits of our students that are going to be hanging in the Lippitt Hall to represent the diversity of our students over time, and many more things. In the interest of time, though, I'd like to now introduce Sarai Argane to come up here, and she will present our last wonderful, I've heard he's really wonderful colloquium speaker. So thank you very much.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to you all. It is my pleasure to introduce you our speaker, Professor Andrew Hoffman. Hoffman is the Holcim Professor of Sustainable Enterprise at the University of Michigan, a position that holds joint appointments in the Ross School of Business and the School for Environment and Sustainability. This academic year, he is a visiting fellow at the Institute for the Study of Business in Global Society at Harvard Business School. Professor Hoffman has published over 100 articles and book chapters, as well as 18 books, which have been translated into 6 languages. In this work, he studies how environmental issues emerge and evolve as social, political, and managerial issues. He also writes about the reasons why people reject the science of climate change and the role of academic scholars in public and political discourse. Among his list of honors, he has won several research, writing, and teaching awards. His work has been covered in many media outlets, including the New York Times, Scientific American, Time, Wall Street Journal, National Geographic, Atlantic, and National Public Radio. I'm so delighted to have Andy here us with tonight. Please join me in welcoming Professor Andy Hoffman.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me okay? I can't see you, the lights are pretty bright, but that'll be okay. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming out tonight. What I want to talk about is that. What I want to talk about is a shift in the business environment, and more importantly, a needed shift within business education. When I look at the world of business schools and the world of climate change, something interesting is happening. Many business schools are now focusing on climate change as a major issue. And this, to me, given the arc of my career, is a fascinating development. When I got my PhD in the early 1990s, I focused on the environment, business and the environment. When I went to faculty offices and said, would you be on my committee at the business school? Almost all of them said, what are you doing here? This has nothing to do with business. Go over to the School of Government. I was able to get a few to be on my committee, and I graduated. My first job interview at a major business school in France, which will remain nameless, happens to be in Fontainebleau, if that means anything to you, actually told me when they were turning me down for a job, we love your stuff on organizational theory, but we think you're too focused on the environment, and they turned me down. Now fast forward 30 years, and this is happening. Fast forward 30 years, and I am a climate fellow at the Harvard Business School. So things have changed. Unfortunately, the environmental issues have changed as well. And so as these business schools start to focus on climate change, I think it's approaching it with a response that's too little, too late. And that's what I want to talk about today. My work for this year on this fellowship is to write a book on how business schools need to change to adapt to the issue of climate change. For most of my career, I have worked to integrate climate change into the business system as it presently exists. Focus on climate change because you can respond to a market shift. You can make more money. I've recently come to the realization that that won't work. That you need to take the business environment, you need to take the business curriculum and fit it within the biosphere. It's a very different way of approaching this, and that's what I want to talk to you about tonight. All these business schools and many more that are starting to focus on climate change are focusing on it as a market opportunity. We can make money and address the climate change problem and live happily ever after. And I just don't think it's going to be that simple. The electric car is great, but it's another car. And the answer to this problem is not another car, it's rethinking mobility. And so we need to come to a different approach when we start to think about addressing climate change, because at the end of the day, climate change is not an environmental issue. Climate change is a systems breakdown. In the face of a systems breakdown, you have to fix the system. That system is capitalism, and we in business schools have a role to play in addressing the corrections in that system. Right now, business schools are focusing on the win-win. Again, we can make money and address climate change, but how do we deal with the win-lose? There are some very difficult issues that are going to have to be answered. It's going on right now in Dubai. What is the future of the fossil fuel sector? And I wrote a paper. I was deliberately trying to be provocative that we need to put the fossil fuel sector into hospice. That came from a private conference I was invited to be a part of with executives from BP, the oil company. And they put different professors in different sessions to be provocateurs. My session was, what's expected of a greening oil company in the 21st century? And I told these people, what's expected of you is to bring your sector, as we know it, to a close. To their credit, they engaged me. They haven't talked to me since then, but they engaged me. And I think this is the kind of question we need to ask. How do we guide the economy to solving this problem? The economy by itself will not do this. We need to have a more clever and thoughtful response. If you're following what's happening right now in the renewable energy sector, profits in renewable energy companies are declining. Profits in oil companies are increasing. Why? Because we happen to have two wars in oil-sensitive regions, and people are riding the train, and the money is moving. And so if we just rely on the market by itself, profit incentive, we may not get there. That's how serious this issue is. So how do we deal with this? How do we go forward? That's the question I want to ask today. That's what I want to engage you on today. This political cartoon captured my attention of the challenge before us right now. I mean, the idea that we're going to make the business case to address climate change. Make the business case to address climate change. Think about that for a second. It's like this. Somehow we need to monetize this thing quickly. We can't deal with it unless there's money to be made. To my mind, making the business case to address climate change is the same as making the business case not to commit suicide. I'm going to be deliberately provocative tonight. I'm old and I don't want to hold back anymore. The idea that businesses can't do anything unless they make money causes some serious problems for you if you're going into business or are already in business. Let's say you're an executive at a company. Let's say you're a woman executive, a woman CEO at a company, and you start looking at the data. And the data shows you that women make 85 cents on the dollar. Are you going to tell me that the only reason you will fix that is if the company makes more money? And if the company starts a process of trying to fix it and they don't make more money, are you going to jettison the program? That's where focusing on the business case all by itself leaves us fairly impoverished in our ability to deal with certain issues. And we need to think more carefully and more clearly. And that conversation has already begun. Right now, we are facing an existential crisis. Climate change is just one marker of this crisis. You look in the upper left, there's the carbon dioxide hockey stick graph, which many of you probably know, where CO2 temperatures levels increased, and then around 1950, they shot up. But they shot up on a whole bunch of other markers as well. And this is causing scientists to propose that we have left the Holocene and we've entered the Anthropocene. We've entered a new geological epoch. They identify 9 planetary boundaries that we should not cross if we want to maintain a safe operating system for humans and other life forms, and we are crossing them. We're crossing on climate change. We're crossing on species extinction. There are estimates that as many as 50% of the species today could be gone by 2100. We're crossing on novel materials that we're introducing into the oceans, and there are estimates that by 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish by weight. This is what we are doing to the environment. Nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, fresh water availability, ocean acidification. We are now an animating force in the environment. This is a place we have never been before, and we are doing this. We need to now come to a new recognition of who we are as a species, what the environment is, and how the two fit together. To give you a sense on a more personal level of what the Anthropocene looks like, I was talking one time to a research chemist at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. We were talking about this and the impact of humans on the environment. And he said, you know, Andy, there are measurable levels of ibuprofen in the Mediterranean Sea. And that really stunned me, both the statement, but he was also very casual about it. And he said, Andy, ibuprofen's a fairly benign compound. That doesn't worry us. What worries us are birth control pills and antidepressants. You take a drug, it passes through your system. Sometimes its mere presence does the job. It leaves, it goes into the treatment system, the sewage treatment system. It can't handle it, and it's discharged into the aquatic environment. And there's research to show strange birth defects at the outfall pipes of these treatment plants in the aquatic, the flora and the fauna. Even going so far as to end up back on our dinner plate. There's some researchers that were studying salmon in Puget Sound 5 years ago. What did they find in the salmon? They found Prozac, they found 50 prescription drugs, they even found cocaine. This is what we are doing to the environment. This is the Anthropocene. And so the idea of just coming up with a sustainable paintbrush or a sustainable hotel seems rather anemic in the face of this challenge. This is what we are facing. Scientists are going through the process of giving formal declaration to this. It's gone through the working group, and now it's going to the broader group. And this is not a philosophical statement. The scientists have to actually identify what they call a golden spike, a place in the strata where we can show that the geological epoch has shifted. They have named 1950 as that date. That's when we started doing radioactive atomic testing. And so think about it this way. If all humans died today, gone, and 1,000 years from now, some future archaeologists start digging, they will find a layer. It will be a very thin layer, but they will find a layer that shows something happened here. What happened here? Humans happened here. What will they find? They'll find radioactive isotopes. They'll find plastic. Somebody suggested it should be called the Plasticine and not the Anthropocene, because that will be the major marker we leave behind as a species. That is the major challenge before us, and we have to address that in the appropriate scale. I think of the scale of this shift as being akin to the Enlightenment. Think of the long arc of human history and humans' relationship to the natural environment. Prior to the Enlightenment, nature dominated us. We didn't understand it. We tried to make sense out of it by seeing it as having mystical forces that drove it. Religion was a major way we tried to understand it. We were very afraid of nature. The Enlightenment comes along and says, no, we can actually control nature. We can dominate nature. Francis Bacon said, we'll tease nature's secrets out of her. We'll put her on the rack and tease nature's secrets out of her. The metaphor was it's a machine. And we can take it apart, we can tinker with it, we can put it back together again. In the Anthropocene, we're starting to recognize that model doesn't work. Where before the Enlightenment, nature dominated us. In the Enlightenment, we thought we could dominate nature. Now we have come to a place in our history where we are cojoined, that the success of one depends on the success of the other. To give you a sense quickly of how fast we got here, consider this. I was born in 1961. In 1961, there were 3 billion people on Earth. Today, there are 7.5 billion people. Do the math. It took Homo sapiens about 20,000 years to go from 0 to 3 billion, and in the course of my short lifetime, that's more than doubled. And if I live to 2050, I'm going to see 10 billion people on this Earth. You can't have that kind of growth without incredible demands on the ecosystem. And we need to start to think a little more cleverly about how we interact with the system and how we, at times, take control of it with a certain degree of humility. That's how big the shift is before us. One thing I like about this metaphor is that the Enlightenment took 100 years, and many people didn't know it's happening until it was done. I might ask you, are we in the midst of a re-enlightenment right now, and are the changes taking place? I think they are, and we just don't see them. We just don't know they're there, and that's what I want to focus on. Because what goes along with this, from my thinking, is a recognition that the model of capitalism that we've had in this country, in the Western nations, shareholder capitalism, which only emerged in the 1970s, is now being questioned. Is the purpose of the corporation just to make money for the shareholder? Or is there something more to this? And people are starting to say, we need to move beyond the shareholder model, that we need to start to think differently about how we organize our economy. And that, to my mind, goes with the Anthropocene. If we're going to address climate change and species extinction and ocean acidification, to my mind, the market has to do it. The market is the most powerful institution on Earth. Business is the most powerful entity within it. It has to be steered in a direction towards solving these problems because it's causing them and it doesn't know how, and it's not going to correct them without some kind of direction, some kind of pressure in a certain direction. And so those two things fit together quite nicely of saying the Anthropocene's a problem, rethinking the economy is another answer. Others are saying this too. Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel laureate in economics, says capitalism needs to be saved from itself. Paul Pullman, former CEO of Unilever, says capitalism is a damaged ideology that needs to be reinvented for the 21st century. These are not radicals outside the market. These are people inside the market saying the market is not working. It needs to be corrected. It needs to be fixed. What are the major threats that we're recognizing that capitalism can't deal with? Well, one is climate change, problems in the natural environment, but we could be talking about income inequality as well. Both of these are what some people might call unintended consequences or externalities, but they're actually baked into the system. The system creates these problems. Thomas Piketty's book made it clear that income inequality, that the rich get richer and the poor don't, is embedded within the system we have. Joseph Stiglitz has been saying the same thing. To give you a sense of how out of whack income inequality has become, we are seeing levels of income inequality measured by the Gini coefficient that we have not seen in this country since the 1920s, since the Gilded Age. Some have suggested we're in a second Gilded Age, where the rich are very, very wealthy and live in a totally different world than the rest of us. For example, during COVID, I don't know how many of you saw this, but David Geffen, a very, very wealthy man, decided it was a good idea to put a post on Instagram saying, "This is where I'm quarantining for the pandemic. I hope everyone's safe." And he posted a picture of his $450 million yacht anchored in the Caribbean. Now, he got rightly abused for that, pulled it down. It's not that he has the money, but the fact that he was so out of touch, so out of tune, that he couldn't see how Marie Antoinette, that statement was, is a sign of the disconnect. A second point in Thomas Piketty's work is that those wealthy people have disproportionate influence on the political process, and they define the system that serves them, and if they're disconnected from the challenges that everyday people have, are we in trouble? Do we have a problem here? Again, the income inequality issue. Right now, the 3 richest people in the United States have as many assets as the poorest 50% of the American public. In 2019, the 26 richest people in the world had assets that equaled the total combined assets of the poorest 3.6 billion people on Earth. In 2013, those 26 people had assets that exceeded the wealth of the US Treasury. That's income inequality. It's baked into the system. How do we fix it along with climate change? Let's talk about business schools and how they're fitting into this, because I think there are many pressures that can drive us to change. And one is this: who are our students? Now, those who are in the class or in the room that are business students, stay with me. Don't get depressed about what I'm going to show you. But there are research to show that management schools draw students who score high on Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. What do we do to these students when they come? They become more self-monitoring and they focus more on self-oriented values. We are doing this to them. It is embedded within the curriculum. To see how that can play out, there was a study that came out in the National Bureau of Economic Research last year. They looked at businesses in the United States and Denmark, and they separated them, those that were run by students or managers who went to business school and those that had managers that didn't go to business school. They found no difference in the profits between the two, but those that went to business school, labor wages went down 6% over 5 years. They did what they were taught to do. They focused on efficiency. They made money for the shareholder. I could frame it another way. It would be much less polite, but that's what they were taught to do, and that's what they did. This data all goes back to 1993, 2007, 2017, 2008. Does this apply to our students today? I have reason to believe it does not. Students are different now. There's something very interesting going on with the students I'm seeing in business school that gives me hope. They're coming in with a different sensibility. 97% of young business professionals want a career with purpose, according to Gallup. Business ethics entered the top 5 most popular subjects for the first time in 2019. 88% of business school students think that learning about social and environmental issues in business is a priority. Students are coming in and they're asking questions about the curriculum and about the lessons they're getting, and that I cheer them on. And they're also doing other things. These are 2 articles that came out, both written by business school students. The top one by a student at the MIT Sloan School while he was at MIT Sloan. And it's called Business Class. Actually, in the printed edition, it was called The Corrupt Ideology of Business Schools. And he is vicious. The business curriculum stifles discussion of the common good while emphasizing the overriding objective of profit maximization is unquestioned. Rather than cultivating open-minded stewards of the economy, we're taught to ignore shareholder capitalism, obvious ethical lapses, and avoid any kind of systemic analysis of it. The article on the bottom, a graduate of the Harvard Business School, the financialization of the American elite. One thing he points out is that students that graduate from the top business schools will move to maybe 5 cities, and 5 cities alone, and they will amass tremendous wealth to themselves. What will they do with that wealth? Will they wall themselves off in gated communities in Boca Raton, or will they become part of society? And his argument is they're going to do more of the former. And they go on to say, an education system that produces a business elite dominated by financiers and their squires, presiding over a disordered economy, gutted of both its productive energy and the ability to generate mass prosperity. Students are asking questions. This just came out in the Financial Times earlier this year, where Gen Z is starting to say, you're not serving us. We want more from this business education. I love this line. Her generation still wants business schools to be the grown-ups and take a lead rather than simply respond to student demands. And I see that. Business schools are reacting to students rather than taking the lead and pushing forward on what can we do about this issue. We're telling students, you got to fix the problem, but we're not giving them the tools to do it. We're still teaching them outmoded ideas about how business works and what business can do. And I think we need to change that. And so the fact that business students would write these articles, I actually think is a good thing. They're speaking out, they're asking questions, they're demanding more, they're pressuring the schools to change. And we need more of that, because students can drive the ship, so can faculty, so can administrators, so can donors, so can recruiters, so can the rankings, so can the accreditation boards. It's all part of the ecosystem to try and drive change within the business school curriculum. What are we facing? Well, I love this line by William Gibson, the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. Our students see it. The vast majority of Gen Z is worried about climate change and wants to do something about it. And they're demanding more from us to give them tools to do it. They see the future. Some of my generation cannot. When you have a CEO of an oil company who happens to be the president of the COP28 come out and mansplain Mary Sullivan, telling her that there's no scientific proof or support for the idea that we need to phase out fossil fuels, clearly there's some that are not going to be on the agenda. But the students are there. They're ahead of us. It's a situation where we need to start to catch up to them. So what do we do about it? Well, we need to reinvent and rejuvenate the business school curriculum. Right now, what we're doing is we're giving them an ethics course, or we're dropping an elective in, or we're making them do an MBA oath, which is a nice idea, but it's an aspirational statement. And we need to think more carefully and clearly about how we need to change the curriculum to deal with this issue. You can't simply drop an elective into the middle of a curriculum that says maximize shareholder value and expect some kind of change. You need to embed it within the whole curriculum, or to my mind, you need to reinvent the curriculum. It's a tall order, but that's what I would propose. We need to start to give students, help students with wisdom. Right now, what we do in business schools, we take data, we turn it into information by understanding relations. We turn that information into knowledge by understanding patterns. We stop there. We need to go one step further and teach and inspire them. You can't teach them. You have to help them find wisdom, character, judgment. Teach the whole student. Don't just touch the head, touch the heart. We have lost that in higher education. We need to get that back. That is a hard thing to do. I get pushback from my colleagues. Andy, I'm not ready to talk about values in the classroom. I don't think that's my place. And my answer is, you already are. Efficiency is always good. The shareholder is the most important. Monetary measures are the only metrics of value. It's embedded within our curriculum. If we don't face up to that, the values we're already teaching, people are selfish, that is embedded within our curriculum. We need to change that. We now need to move forward and start to help students find wisdom. It also requires us to step out into a different mode of being a professor. I can teach knowledge by standing in front of the classroom, being a knowledge expert, and just share my knowledge with my students. I'm in control. They are subordinate to me. But in the exploration and the pursuit of wisdom and character and purpose, my job is that of a guide, to put them in an environment where they have to find it themselves and help them explore it, help them understand what it is, but they have to find their purpose. Every student has a different purpose. No one can find it for them. I can't tell them their purpose. They have to find it themselves. I can guide them in that process, and that's a role that professors, many of my colleagues, are very uncomfortable to go, but I think it's where we need to go. I would actually argue that AI is such a threat to higher education, a threat to our pedagogy, that this response of being more of a guide, less of a knowledge expert, AI is going to push us there too. But this is what we need to do. So, this is a book by Rakesh Khurana, which I really like. It's called From Higher Aims to Higher Demands. The students in my sessions today have already heard about it. But it's a history of the American Business School. And this closing comment I really like. He says, the American Business School was originally founded to train a professional class of managers in the mold of doctors and lawyers to seek the higher aims of commerce and service to society. We're going back to the early 1900s. But it has effectively retreated from that goal, leaving a gaping moral hole at the center of business education and therefore management itself. The time has come to rejuvenate the intellectual and moral training of future business leaders. He wrote this in 2010. Very little has changed since then, but this is the challenge. This is what we're facing. I like the idea where he says, we have left a gaping moral hole at the center of business education and therefore management. This speaks to the idea that some of the ethical lapses we've seen within the business community is in part because of us. We produced these students. We trained these students that went out into the business world and cheated on emissions for Volkswagen, signed up for people for credit cards without their permission at Wells Fargo. We are part of this system. We need to play a stronger role in shifting it. That's what I want to focus on here. So, if I had a magic wand, I would blow up the curriculum, and I would start again. And these are some of the things I would focus on. If your school isn't doing it, find ways to bring it in. But right off the bat, what is the purpose of the firm? I could take this microphone and walk up to anybody in this auditorium, out on the campus, and say, finish this sentence. The purpose of the firm, the purpose of the corporation is to, and they will parrot back, make money for the shareholder. Let's all repeat it together. Let's make money for the shareholder. That is not the purpose of the corporation. That is what has got us into trouble. There are so many flaws in that argument. Right off the bat, which shareholder? Well, the one that's very short-sighted, the one that only cares about next quarter's returns and doesn't want to deal with any of the problems in the corporation. There are other kinds of investors that are in there for the long term, but we don't talk about them. We only talk about the selfish, short-term, short-sighted investor. There are legal problems with this. Talk to any lawyer. You can try and sue a company saying you didn't put your shareholders first. You're going to have to get through something called the good judgment rule, where you're going to have to prove that those executives did not do what they thought was in the best interest of the company. That's a very high bar, probably an impossible bar to cross. And then practically, if I buy shares in Ford Motor Company, that doesn't mean I can walk into a Ford dealer and say, you work for me. It doesn't mean I can walk into Ford headquarters and say, this building is partly mine. It's a contract. I gave them money with the expectation of my principal and a return. If they don't meet that, I move my money elsewhere. I don't own the company. I can exercise my proxy vote, but that is something that's taken under advisement. And so what do we think about when we think about the purpose of the firm? I love the line by Kenneth Mason. He was the former president of Quaker Oats. He said, making money is no more the purpose of a corporation than getting enough to eat is the purpose of life. Jack Welch, former CEO of General Electric, said, shareholder primacy is the dumbest idea in the world. Profits are an output. They're not the purpose. They are the outcome of running your company well. Peter Drucker, the purpose of a company is to create a customer. The enterprise exists for the sake of the contribution which makes to the welfare of society as a whole. These are some outdated ideas that we need to bring back into the conversation. And the conversation has been engaged. BlackRock, Business Roundtable, World Economic Forum have all come out with statements trying to redefine the purpose of the corporation. You can look at them with skepticism, and you should. You should always, track us, don't trust us. But they've engaged the conversation. Where are we as business schools? We're still teaching shareholder primacy. We need to engage this conversation. What is the purpose of the firm? We need to bring that into our curriculum. We should bring it into our research as well. Then we can rethink the purpose and role of the leader. And this is an area I've gone in my teaching where I got a grant from the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations to start a program called Management as a Calling, where I take business students on a retreat in the woods. I take away their cell phones and their computers. There's research to show that creativity happens in moments of boredom. We kill that creativity every time we pull out the cell phone when we've got nothing to do. We're killing the opportunity for creativity. Nature reduces our stress hormones. So I'm going to put them in this environment to guide them through a process of discerning their calling and management. I love the man by dog story element of that, and it gets people's attention. NPR picked up on it and others, and that's really exciting. I find the students resonate with it as well. The idea of a calling or a vocation is something that I find my students really resonate with, really gravitate to, that their work is going to be more of an expression of who they are. We can see that in the whole phenomenon of conscious quitting, of students, of employees saying, these companies' values don't fit mine, I'm going to look elsewhere. This is a good thing as we move forward. We need to teach students to become stewards of the market. I am actually quite amazed how little coverage we have in the business curriculum of Adam Smith, Karl Marx, Joseph Schumpeter. I could go down the list. What is capitalism? What is it as a structure? How was it originally conceived? How has it evolved over time? What are the multiple forms that are out there? Scandinavian capitalism is very different than American capitalism, very different than Japanese capitalism, but we teach one form. What are the problems with it right now? And where does it need to go to address issues like climate change and income inequality? We have to get to this level as we start to think about this issue and teach students the idea that you have a role to play in stewarding the system in which you will practice your craft. At some point, you will be an executive. Your next session is on democracy. The extent to which corporations are affecting democracy is a really important issue. And so this says that business has a responsibility to maintain the proper operating system called capitalism to do what it needs to do. It's one of the few times, I'll go for it. It's one of the few times I'll agree with Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson actually said one time, capitalism is a tool just like a toaster oven or a staple gun. If it doesn't work, get a new tool. I'm not suggesting we throw out capitalism. I am suggesting we fix it. The reality is you can never wipe a system clean and come up with a new system. Every set of institutions come from the institution that precede it. There's no other way. We have to evolve capitalism, not replace it. There's a wonderful essay by Stephen Jay Gould, the famous anthropologist from Harvard, where he wrote this essay called The Creation Myths of Cooperstown. The idea that Abner Doubleday invented baseball in Cooperstown in 1896 is preposterous. It was a game that was evolving over time. He wrote down the rules. Capitalism wasn't invented by Adam Smith in 1776. He saw something happening. He started to write it down. He gave it structure, created the field of economics, but it was happening around him, and it has evolved ever since. That's the way we need to approach this. We need to bring the government back in. And again, for your next topic, the extent to which business is now involved in our social and political discourse, whether it's through corporate activism, whether it's through lobbying and funding, whether it's through our legal system where corporate personhood has been codified in recent decisions such as Citizens United. There are certain rights that you would expect a corporation to have like an individual, the protection from illegal search and seizure, the right to due process. Do they have a right to free speech? This is something that our founding fathers got very uncomfortable with, this idea of this artificial entity that has perpetual life having free speech. It used to be that you had to have a charter to run a company, and that has changed. Do they have a right to use money as free speech? Citizens United said yes. Spending your money is an exercise of your free speech. Is that true? General Motors has a heck of a lot more money than I do. Does that mean they have more free speech than I do? According to the Supreme Court, yes. Even to the point of saying the mere presence of money does not connote influence. There are some serious problems here that we're going to need to address. Does a corporation have the right to religion, free exercise of religion? The decision in the Hobby Lobby case said yes. And that's where a lot of people said, okay, there's something wrong here. We need to rethink the personhood of the corporation. So I presume that will come up next year. This is a big topic. But we have to think about the proper role of government in the market and the proper role of business and policy making. They can't be separated. I taught a course 2 years ago, bringing together students from the business school and the public policy school it's called Business in Democracy, tackling this question. And I asked the students halfway through, what do your peers think about you taking this class? And the answers were amazing. The business students said, some of our peers said, why would you take a course on government? What does that have to do with business? Which is astonishingly naive. And it's amazing to me how few business schools even have a course on lobbying. Lobbying is a central aspect of what business does to provide a service done in the proper way. The policy students said, their peers said to them, you actually went in that building? You actually took a course at that school? That's the enemy, which is also astonishingly naive. And so there's some very interesting conversation right now within scholarly circles and within business circles and policy circles of moving towards a variant of industrial policy. It used to be seen as protectionism. Now it's seen as a necessary corrective to put guardrails on the market and steer it in a certain direction. If you're following what Joe Biden has done with the CHIPS Act, with the IRA, it's industrial policy. It has not gotten near the amount of attention that I would have expected it to get, particularly from the right side of the aisle. But that's what he's doing, and that's where we're moving, of a more collaborative role between business and government, a more healthy role, because government has been demoted. We need to start to think in systems. Systemic problems need systemic solutions. A sustainable paintbrush, a sustainable food, sustainable hotel, that's not the answer. We need to start thinking about moving from reducing unsustainability to creating sustainability. That is a systems way of thinking about it. And so moving from reducing carbon emissions to going carbon neutral or negative, it's a totally different question. You approach it in a totally different way. If we're going to go reduce our carbon emissions, I can talk to you about how to do that in the building right now through energy efficiency, insulation, things like that. How do we make this building carbon neutral? That's a very different approach where we have to start to think about what's the purpose of the building to begin with, how can we meet its objectives in different ways, and that is a totally different conversation. We need to start to think systemically about it. We need to re-examine consumption, growth, and metrics. Is there such thing as sustainable consumption? If there isn't, we got a serious problem because we have an economy based on consumption. If it's consumption of just more stuff, we can't get there. How do we think differently about satisfying our needs and our wants that doesn't require material possession or energy use? How do we decouple? How do we decouple GDP growth from energy and material use? There's how we can start to think about consumption, but there's the Gordian knot. And we can start to think about some of the metrics we teach and the problems that take us in the wrong direction. I just want to check on my time. Okay, I'm going to wrap up real quick. GDP measures the movement of money only. Whether it's good or bad, it measures money. And that can steer us in many wrong directions. Let me give you an example. I can start every morning eating Krispy Kreme donuts, have lunch at McDonald's, finish off my day at Burger King. I could do this every day and GDP goes up. Then I have a heart attack and I go to the hospital. GDP goes up. And then I die and my family has a funeral for me. GDP goes up once again. It's merely the movement of money. How do we think about other metrics to measure national prosperity and health? And there have been some very interesting reports to try and think about different ways to measure prosperity. Money is not the only metric, and the movement of money is not the only metric. Discount rates. $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. Yes. But sometimes using discount rates can get us into trouble. And Nicholas Stern stirred a healthy debate on this when he wrote his report on the economics of climate change. He used a really low discount rate because he said there are certain times when discount rates are inherently immoral. Let's use a discount rate of 10%. Straight line depreciation, everything 10 years beyond is worthless in our economic calculations. Is that true? Obviously not. That's called your future. Yet our economic calculations blind us to that because we use discount rates. How do we think about other metrics? And so these are just some examples of re-examining what we're doing. Redirect material and energy flows. How do we think about circular economy? Reuse our materials. Keep the molecules at the highest level. This is the great work. This is what the challenge is for our students today. This is what we're expecting them to solve. This is an idea from Thomas Berry. And he says, the success or failure of any historic age is the extent to which those living at that time have fulfilled the special role that history imposed upon them. Is a role given to us, but not beyond, is a role given to us beyond any consultation with ourselves, We did not choose. We were chosen by some power beyond ourselves for this historic task. The nobility of our lives, however, depends upon the manner in which we come to understand and fulfill our assigned role. So as we start to search for our purpose and our calling, our vocation, we also recognize we're in a particular context. I could be giving this talk in 1942. I could have business students who are going to think they're start a new company, be a titan on Wall Street, whatever it is. But the great work on that day was World War II. And the nobility of that generation was measured by how they responded to that great work. I think the great work today is around sustainability, around finding a proper balance with the natural systems and creating a more equal society. There is the great work. Young people may feel resentful at the world that they were delivered. Too bad. That's the world you have. That's the context you have. That's the context in which you have to find your great work. And I would hope that you'd step forward. So, are we facing a re-enlightenment? I was asked to talk about hope, so this is my hope slide. The way I answer this question is I talk about the difference between hope and optimism. And some of you students have read this. Optimism is looking at the odds and saying they're in my favor, I'm going to do it. Hope is, I don't care what the odds are, I'm going to do it anyway. Hope is a faith and a belief that things can change in ways I cannot predict. And this is really important for us moving forward. If I was just an optimist, I would probably give up because I'm actually somewhat pessimistic that we're going to solve this problem. But am I hopeful of some black swan event changing things? Absolutely. Hope has accomplished far more in our world than optimism. Hope convinced Abraham Lincoln to continue to exercise the Civil War. The odds were against the North winning that war, and yet he continued to press. Hope allowed Nelson Mandela to walk out of a prison after 24 years almost entirely in solitary and not be a bitter man and become the president of South Africa. Hope does far more than optimism. Hope reaches far further than optimism. I would put my money on hope before optimism any day. And I am hopeful that we will solve this problem because I see change, I see energy, I see young people want to roll up their sleeves and work on this, and we need to give them the tools to do that. So for those of you in your audience who are thinking about what you want to do, I want to leave you with one final thought, and it comes from a picture of my grandparents. There's my grandmother, and she was born in 1899. She died in 1995. And I remember when she died, I went to her funeral in Pennsylvania, and I just thought about all the things she saw in her life. She saw the advent of indoor plumbing, indoor electrification, the first car, first flight, first space mission, man land on the moon. She saw all that and more. And if I had approached her when she was the age of my students and said, this is the future you'll die in, she would say, you're out of your mind. That will never happen. If I could possibly show young people today the world they will die in, they will say, that's crazy. That's never going to happen. And in fact, I think the pace of change is accelerating from my grandmother's time. So the future, 60, 70, 80 years from now, is beyond my comprehension. Now, the exercise of this is not to imagine what that future will be. The exercise is for you to say, what role do I want to play in making it the world I want it to be? That's the opportunity before you. That's the opportunity I hope you'll take to heart and use your education to solve. Thank you very much. Oh, there's people out there.
Questions from the audience? Yes.
That was fantastic. Thank you. I've become a fan. I think what's interesting to me is how at some point in our lives, I'm a child of the same decade, the knowledge we have turns all of us into futurists. Futurists, where we start to look at the direction that we're going with the hope that what we see, or what we will continue to see in the next 5 years because of what we know, will have value. and that we can pass it back in ways that will give generations behind us not just the chance to be what we are talking about them becoming, what they need to become, but to surpass that, because we will put them on a course of not just discovery, but awareness of what is around them, right? My concern, I am both an optimist, but I run on hope. I mean, actually, this is my professor right here. I wish I could take you in so that you could take my final oral exam, because you have so many things that I've been trying to articulate that, I mean, it's just really wonderful. I'm concerned, though, with the idea that democratizing to this younger generation the direction is a dangerous thing, because first, to succeed as a society, all those great errors were not individuals, they were cultures, connected, people who shared common values, common purpose, common educational, common social experiences. That is a foundational web, and I'm not sure how we get that into the curriculum.
I suppose I have kind of maybe oh, it's dead. Okay. I may have kind of an impossible chicken and egg question, but it's evident that it's both government and business that need to make this shift. Who do we address first? When we're looking to make this change, who do we go to first? Do we go to the businesses to help to fix the government, or vice versa? How do we?
I mean, there is a movement to try and get businesses to exercise what's called corporate political responsibility. It's a nice ploy, CPR. And so, okay, I'll eat it. I watch rock stars do this. I've always wondered who gets the mic after they're done, or who had the mic before me. So there's pressures on corporations, but that alone is not going to do this. And so we need to start to rethink how government is positioned vis-a-vis the market, whether it's controls on lobbying, controls on funding dollars. There's no one answer. There's no primacy of answers. If you're going to change a system, you try and find the strongest levers, but there's not just one lever. You know, Donella Meadows wrote a lot about this, how you change a system. And so we have to think about all of them. And then I want to piggyback on your question, because I think there's a question for all of us of what can we do. And I think each one of us has a sphere of influence. Mine is my students. At the end of the day, that is the most important lever I have for trying to change the system. But my role, and I told an earlier group this, I've adopted the moniker of an elder. And I don't mean that by age. I don't think I'm an old man, although I'm older than you probably think. But an elder is someone who no longer thinks about their own status or their accomplishments, but thinks about the next generation. And that means mentoring them, but also changing the institutions which they come up. And that animates what I told you tonight. I want to change the institutions of higher education, both in terms of teaching, and this afternoon's session was in terms of research. And so that's what I can do as a senior scholar who's earned his bones, accomplished what I need to accomplish, and the idea of just tacking on more academic papers and more citation counts and boosting my H-index, to what end, I don't know. And, David Brooks writes about this, called this, going from the first mountain to the second mountain. It's about legacy. It's about connection. It's about community. And I think we need more people to do this. Too often in our society, we jettison the elders. Yet they're tremendous sources of wisdom, and they can be tremendous guides to try and change the world around us, to make it easier for those that are coming up to do what they need to do. And so find your sphere of influence, be an elder.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay.
You're looking at your notes. You're making me nervous.
No, I was just writing down things while you were speaking. I first wanted to say today in class, I think you had a lot of moving points that honestly I think hit me at the right time too. I really took in everything you said and it really meant a lot. I just want to say thank you for that. But also, you made some great points about purpose, finding purpose, and there's not just one purpose in one's life. And then we just kind of went into the difference between hope and optimism. And so kind of what I was trying to find a connection towards was, does hope fuel the discovery of purpose, or does purpose guide the enactment of the hope that we were discussing? Or are they intertwined by definition? And does this understanding of the relationship kind of contribute towards the efficiency of this hidden enlightenment that you were talking about?
Let me think about that for a second, because there's a mechanical element to your question that I'm trying to get past. The idea that I can give you a flow chart on how to put this all together, and I think everyone has to find their way. It's more of a stumbling search. Some people have, so the idea of a calling, you have to have faith that it exists. You will have people that tell you that it doesn't exist. It's very easy in our world today to be a cynic. Cynicism is laziness. It's just looking for easy, simple, convenient answers that keep you protected from being vulnerable. I think it's Mother Teresa said to be honest and to be authentic means to be vulnerable. Be authentic anyway. You might get hurt, but the majority of the time, you're going to see the best in people. And so I don't have a simple answer for you. And when gurus do give you simple answers, be suspicious. You have to find your way. And so are they intertwined? You're asking a great question. Maybe for you it is. Maybe for the person next to you it's not. This is a personal journey, and one that will be a part of your journey for your whole life. I was able to do some interviews with Paul Pullman. He stepped down as CEO of Unilever. He's still trying to find his calling. A very thoughtful, deep man. But you have to believe that a calling exists in the first place. And to my mind, it's the same as believing that love exists. Do you love your parents and your family? Yes. Can you prove it? No. Is there any empirical data? No. I once wrote an essay, and I said that science needs to exercise more humility. Especially as we start to entertain ideas like geoengineering the planet, spreading sulfur oxide in the atmosphere to reflect sunlight, putting ferrous oxide in the ocean to cause an algae bloom that fish will eat, die, bring the carbon to the bottom. We screwed up the system by accident. The idea that we can fix it by tampering with it, I have a problem with, and there's a hubris in science. In the essay, I said there are some things that science will never be able to explain. I said one of them is love. I got a rebuttal. It was a vicious rebuttal. And the scientist said something amazing. He said, Hoffman says that science can't explain love. Most certainly it can. Love, and I'm quoting, love is merely the release of certain chemicals in the body. We can inject those chemicals, we can elicit love. That's a worldview that your body is a bag of chemicals and you are not anything more than that as an individual, as a spiritual person, and I reject that worldview. A calling fits in with the idea that you are more of a spiritual being than just merely a bag of chemicals. But there are people out there who do believe you're just a bag of chemicals. Don't let them bring you down, and stick with it. And so there does require to be a bit of hope that it exists out there, just like you hope one day to fall in love with somebody, and maybe you already have. And that's a wonderful thing in life that is not merely the release of certain chemicals. It's something much deeper.
Thank you.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you for your talk, and thank you for raising awareness on the need to make the change.
You have to eat the microphone.
Okay, can you hear me better? Okay. Thank you for raising awareness on the need to change, and also the fact that that change really will have to start from the young people at this point.
Let's not take our generation off the hook. We have a role to play too in
Right.
creating the possibility for them to do what they need to do.
But I think you being at that level near all these thinking hubs bring also that awareness to science and arts, because they all are monetized. And 100 years ago, insulin was given to the world for nothing, and now they're charging thousands of dollars for one vial. So, or the same with cancer therapies, they're charging you what is worth for what is left for in your lifetime, just to live another 2 years, I guess. So that needs to change. These young people start trying to do good for the world, and then in the universities, they're teaching them how to monetize it. So they're coming out, inventing something that is good for the world. I mean, medicines are good for the world. Technology can be good for the world, but I guess part of the class is how to monetize it and become a millionaire. There are more billionaires probably in the millennial class than our generation, so because they learn how to do that. But I think we have to make all these good inventions accessible to the poorest half of the world. And right now it's not happening. So, but thank you for bringing awareness to that.
You know, the funny thing is that what you said is true in the most visible cases. But there are a lot of people, I mean, when Jonas Salk gave away the patent for insulin, he didn't do it on the front page of the New York Times. He did it quietly. And so a lot of people who are out there doing good for society, doing good for the world. I just met a scientist who developed a technology that will form an inexpensive form of energy by mimicking biosynthesis. It was bought by a major technology company, and he wrote into the contract, you have the rights to this, but the poor people in India can get it for free. He wrote it into the contract. You don't read that on the cover of the New York Times, but you do read about the jerk that bought that company for orphan drugs and then jacked the price 1,000 times to make himself rich. Certainly monetization becomes a problem. You had Jerry Davis here earlier, and he wrote a wonderful essay in Medium. The title of it, Jerry's always good for a provocative title, is Shareholder Capitalism a Suicide Pact? And what he was saying was, when we start to put monetary values on things and look at things as merely a transaction, for example, college education, better have a return on investment. Or, I was hit by a car, I should have looked at it like I grabbed the gold ring. I should have sued the bejesus out of this person. I didn't. In our present economic system, that's irrational. Because rationality means I'm going to try and make as much money as I can as fast as I can. And so we need to undo that kind of rationalism and start to think differently about who we are as humans and what makes for a meaningful life.
You talked about getting the government more involved on a curriculum level, but for more climate change and sustainability, how do you think change can be made when a lot of the times it's the world leaders and people in high positions of powers of business that do the harm?
This is the tough one. This is what's playing out in Dubai right now. Very powerful, wealthy people are not, they're getting pushed in the right direction, but they're not going there willingly. I mean, the Pope, he had an encyclical letter on climate change, and he just came out with a subsequent letter 2 months ago. If you read it, he just takes aim at global leaders and says, you have a responsibility to do something here. And I think the role of religion in this debate is too weak, and so I'm glad he did that. I think more need to do it. If you read the letter, he also points his finger at us. And he says I'm trying to think of the adjective he used, basically the reckless lifestyle, the irresponsible lifestyle that we have in the West, when our carbon emissions are 3 times that of China, 22 times that of developing countries. We have a disproportionate responsibility to do something about this issue. That's the challenge before us, and global leaders are getting pushed by public opinion and pulled by private interests that stand to lose. And the truth is that when someone stands to lose something, they're going to fight harder than someone that stands to gain something. And so I have no simple answer on this one. How do we change our global institutions? At the end of the day, though, climate change represents a challenge, the likes of which we as a species have never faced before. It requires a level of global cooperation we have never done. It requires us to recognize that we were one common people with one common problem, and we've never done that before. People use the Montreal Protocol and the reduction of CFCs as an example. That isn't even close. It was basically one product, 2 companies, ICI and DuPont, and they didn't do anything until DuPont developed an alternative. To use that as an example is silly. We're talking about carbon. We're talking about something that's in the entire economy. It affects us all. And the answer is not going to be simple, and it's going to take a long time to address it. But I can also say that I've been watching the COPs since they started, the Conference of the Parties. I have not seen the kind of attention that I'm seeing on this one right now. Maybe it won't create the kind of outcome we want, but the momentum is building. Is it going too slow? Yes. Can it change on a dime? Yes. And so that's what we have to hope. Let's keep working on it, and let's hope it works out. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.